Hi, I'm Libby and I'm a tutor with BPP Professional Education. Now you might have heard that from February 2014, the computer-based examinations for the knowledge modules and Foundations in Accountancy diploma are going to change. So in this presentation we're going to focus on F3 and I'm going to talk about all of those changes as well as that all-important exam technique. So we'll be looking at certain key skills which are going to help you pass the exam, but before we do that, let's have a look at the exam itself. So the exam is still going to be 2 hours long, there is still not going to be any reading time, and it's still going to be worth in total 100 marks. But here's where the change is. It's now going to be 2 sections rather than 1 section. So you'll see that in the first section we have a lot of objective test questions, whereas in the second question there's going to be multitask questions, which, as it says, means there's going to be questions which have multiple tasks within them. So let's have a little look in those 2 sections. Section A is going to be worth 70 marks in total, and there's going to be 35 questions, so each of them will be worth 2 marks. In section B we're going to have just 2 questions, and those are going to be worth 15 marks each, so 30 marks in total. Now don't worry, those 15 marks are going to be spread up into loads of little different tasks, so you're not going to have to just answer one question for the full 15 marks. Phew. As well as that, the pass mark is still going to be 50%. So now we've had a look at the exam, let's go through some of the key skills which you need to pass the exam. So when we're looking at the ACCA, you need to be thinking of all the knowledge you need, but also you need to know how to utilise that knowledge. Well, how on earth are you supposed to manage all that? We've got 4 key skills which we think will help you pass the examination, and just keep these skills in mind throughout your studies because that's going to help you maximise your chances of passing. So, key skill number 1, we're going to be looking at learning and understanding the syllabus. Now, that's broken down into 2 key parts. The first bit is learning, so we are going to need to read and review the material in the syllabus, but unfortunately it's not just going to be a case of learning and then churning that out in the exam. We are actually going to have to apply that knowledge in certain situations. So this is where the understanding comes into it. The understanding is where we're going to take that knowledge and apply it to a number of scenarios within the exam, and the all-important new multitask questions are going to focus on this key skill. So when you are doing question practice for this particular examination, make sure you focus on also the definitions and the factual questions, but as well as that, the application questions as well, to give yourself a full knowledge of the syllabus. Key skill number 2 is all about time management. So what we don't want to happen in the exam is you to run out of time. So it's really important you stick to the minutes per mark. Now, it is a 2-hour examination and there is going to be 100 marks available in total. So that means that's going to be 1.2 minutes per mark. Now just think about how that relates to each section of the exam. Section A, there's going to be 2 marks per question, and Section B, there's going to be 15 marks per question. Now, obviously, it's going to take a lot of time for you to keep on looking up and down at the clock to see exactly how much time you have left and where you should be in the examination. So we don't expect you to do that. What we expect you to do is to maybe split the exam up into 4 sections, half-an-hour slots, and then think at each half an hour, have I got to the point I expected? Have I done enough questions so far? That gives you an idea of how far you are and how long you've got left to go. But also be aware when you're getting closer to the end of the examination that you still have section B to do. Now, as that's 2 questions worth 15 marks each, that's going to be a total of 36 minutes. So make sure you do leave adequate time to get those all-important marks for section B. In terms of timing as well, we also find it best not to jump around the exam paper too much because that in itself can waste some time. So go through them in a logical structure, maybe a question at a time, but that doesn't mean that you have to answer every single question that you come to in the exam. If you don't know the answer to one question right at that very moment, then just move past it and then come back to it later. You can use all the functionality in the exam to have a look to see what questions you have answered and which questions you haven't answered yet. Okay, so that's the first two. Let's move on to number 3 now. Number 3 is going to be tackling objective test questions. So we're going to be focusing in on section A now, and there's going to be a number of questions which they could give you. So we're going to be going through each of these questions in turn, just picking out some key points which are going to help you answer these questions in the exam. The first type of question we have is a multiple choice question. So as you can see on the slide now, we've been given the question at the top and then we've been given 4 answers to choose from. All we're going to need to do is to select the right one answer from each of those answers, and that's going to get us the marks. So we either get it 100% right or unfortunately 100% wrong. So we need to make sure we have checked the correct answer. Question type number 2 is our multiple response questions, which are similar to the previous type of question, where instead of having just one answer, we might have to give 2 or more answers. So in this particular example, we've said that we need to show 2 of the following errors, and we have to select those 2 errors out of 4. Now, this is where the difference between section A and section B comes into play. With section A, we do not have partial marking, which means we are either going to get the question right and pick up all of the 2 marks, or we're going to get it wrong and pick up no marks. So when it comes to this particular question, we're going to have to choose the 2 correct answers in order to pick up 2 marks. If we only select one of the right answers, we're going to pick up no marks. Moving on to the next type of question, we have our multiple response matching. So this is where, as the example shows, we're going to be given a listing of statements on the left of the question, and then there's going to be columns over on the right hand side. And what we need to do is we need to match the statement to the columns. Now the example that we've shown you here in the slide relates to a true or false question, but that might not always be the case. We might have to pick a financial statement line item and then match it to the financial statement it should be included in, such as the statement of profit or loss, the statement of financial position, or even the statement of cash flows. So just remember, it's not always true or false. So when we're answering this type of question, again, remember in section A, it's either 100% right or 100% wrong. So we're going to need to make sure that each statement is correctly included in the right column to get the full marks. Also, just a quick note, just because they give you a number of columns doesn't mean that you're going to have an answer in each of those columns. One column could be left completely and utterly blank. So for example, in this particular question, all of the statements could be true. That's absolutely fine. Moving on to the next one, we've got question number 4, which is going to be our number entry. And this is where we're going to have to do a calculation ourselves and then enter a number into the answer box. Now, the tricks of the trade is all to do with how we're typing in the number into the answer box. There are certain rules that we're going to need to follow. For instance, we're only going to be able to use a decimal place once to signify decimal places, and we have to use a full stop in order to generate that decimal place. If we're talking about large numbers, we're not going to be allowed to use a comma. So anything in terms of thousands or 10,000, we're going to leave the comma out. When it comes to representing a negative figure, we're not allowed to use brackets. We're only allowed to use a minus sign. So please remember all of those rules when you're generating your answer. For example, if the answer to this question was 10,234.35, we would be able to use the answer on the left with the minus sign and the full stop, but we would not be able to use the answer on the right, including brackets and a comma. The computer just won't be able to recognise it, so please make sure you do follow those rules. And just a quick hint on the decimal places, if there is decimal places required in the question will tell you exactly how many decimal places you need to write in your answer. Okay, so that's all for section A of the paper. Now we can move on to tackling the multitask questions, which we'll see in section B. Now, section B can include all the different types of objective questions that we've just seen in part A, but the one key difference between section A and section B questions is in the marking. Section B is where we get a chance to have a look at partial marking now, so we don't need to get the question 100% accurate in order to get us some of the marks. So I'm just going to use the example, which was our multiple response question, just to show you how this will work. Now in this question, if you remember, we said that we needed to pick 2 answers out of the 4 to get us to the full marks. In section B, we can get part marks. So if we only get one of them right, we get half the marks. However, we need to make sure we have ticked the appropriate number of answers. That is very, very important. So for this particular question, it says we need to pick 2 of the following answers. Selecting 2 answers will make sure we've picked the right number. If one of those is then right, we will pick up half the marks. So that was the partial marking. But another exciting bit about section B is also what other types of questions we could be asked. So there are 2 new types of questions which we could have for this particular section. First one is going to be the gap fill. Now, gap fills are going to be where we're including a number within the box, as we've seen previously, but we could also use a pick list as well. So we'll have a drop-down box, a selection of answers, which we need to choose one of those. We've also got another new type, which is the hotspot questions. Now, these aren't included in the F3 exam, so I'm going to just concentrate on the gap fill questions. Now, I have an example of this over on the next slide. So for this task, we had to generate a statement of profit or loss. And as you can see a number of times throughout this particular answer, they've given us a pick list, which is where we have the box with the arrows on the right-hand side. Now, just to give you an example of how this will work, if you go down to the equity owners of Keswick Co., you'll see now that I've opened up the pick list box and you'll be able to select one of the answers out of those. Remember, when you're picking an answer, make sure that is the answer that shows up in the box after you shut the drop-down box, because we need to make sure we've put the right one in there to get the marks. Now, in terms of this particular answers as well, we need to be thinking of, what happens if we make a mistake? Oh no, is that going to affect the rest of the question? Well, good news, guys, it's not. So the great things about these particular types of questions is that they have been developed so that each box is going to be independent of the one that's come before it. Which means, yes, if we do make a mistake right at the top of our pro forma, it's not going to have an impact later on. And using that drop box, this gives us a really good example. We just need to tell them how the profit is going to be calculated. So that means we can't get that answer wrong if the profit was incorrect in the top of our calculation. Ooh, that's nice to know. Okay, so there are a couple of other things that we're going to need to look at within this type of question, but we'll come back to those in a moment. The next thing I want to focus in on is the functionality of these particular questions. So, this is a specific question which is on one of the specimen papers you'll see on the ACCA websites. And as you'll see on the slide at the moment, we have the background right at the very top, and then we've got rather large task 1. And if we continue to scroll down the page, we then see task 2 and task 3, and then finally task 4 and task 5. It's a rather long question. Now, if we need to generate the answer in task 4, but using the information in task 1, that's going to mean we're scrolling up and down the question quite a long way. Now, this is where the functionality is going to help, because as you can see in this particular question at the moment, each of the tasks has a heading bar, and on the heading bar there's either going to be a negative or a positive sign. Now, if it's a negative, that means that it's going to be showing you the whole of the task, but if you click that negative sign, it's going to minimise that all into that one line, so you don't need to have a look at everything, which is really, really good, because then if I move on to the next bit, we can have a look at task 1, and if I minimise task 2 and task 3, that means I can get to task 4 a lot quicker. So this means your navigation skills are going to be a lot easier. Okay, great functionality. So, things to watch out for, guys. There are another 2 things which I want to mention, and then also a reminder of some of the other things that we've spoken about throughout the rest of the presentation. So the first thing is when to use a negative sign. Now, in one of the previous questions that I showed you on the screen, this pro forma, we can see that there are administration costs and also distribution costs. Now, you and me know that those are expenses and that those expenses need to be deducted from the income. So you would assume that you need to include a minus sign in that answer box to get to the right answer. However, please be careful, because as you can see in the pro forma, there is a word next to the administrative cost which said less. And if it says less, that means we are going to need to deduct the balance. And as such, we don't need to include the minus sign within that answer box. So just be careful about that. In the same way, if it does said add, then we don't need to have a positive symbol there as well. So be careful. Another thing relating to this question as well is what kind of balance we're going to be including in the pro forma. Now, right at the very top, you'll see that it says thousands. It says thousands of dollars, which means we can work in thousands of dollars. But that might not always be the case throughout the exam, so please do be careful about that. For example, in the next question that I've just put on the screen now, it says that we need to give our answer in just dollars. So be aware, make sure you're putting the correct figure in there as well. A couple of other things to watch out for, some of which we've already seen. Remember to read the question very, very carefully. Sometimes the wording can be a little bit odd, but don't worry, you will get used to that when you do lots and lots of question practice. But we need to read the question carefully to ensure we know what the examiner is actually asking us for. So that's key tip number one. But also a couple of things to remind yourself is mainly the numbers. So what are we going to need to input? Remember, there's only going to be one decimal point. We don't use commas to signify thousands, and we don't use brackets for negatives, only the minus signs. And decimal places will be given to us in the question as well, so just watch out for those as well. So finally, guys, what are the next steps? Well, question practice, question practice, question practice. That is the best way to get you to that final pass mark in the exam. Get yourself used to what questions could come up in the exam paper. Now, make sure you don't just rely on the definitions and the facts questions. Make sure you also have a look at the application questions as well, because both of those are going to get tested in the exam. As well as that, you need to utilise all the resources possible. So get yourself a practice and revision kit if you can, to have a large question bank for those questions. And then also you'll find on the ACCA website there are specimen papers, so you can see what the exam will actually look like. Now, the good news for F3 is that there's going to be two for the February 2014 papers and onwards. There's going to be one which is a full exam with Section A and Section B, and then there's also going to be one dedicated to multitask questions, and that's going to have an additional 2 multitask questions in there for you to practice. Just remember, guys, that you need to be aware of all the support that you've got. So if you do need any extra help, then please go to your learning provider and they will be able to help you through this process. And last of all, guys, good luck for all of your examinations. I hope it goes well.